The Game of Zen explores the often overlooked ways in which professional, personal, and spiritual growth are interrelated. We dive deep into the life teachings of the Buddha and the mindfulness practices of Zen, revealing how they can help us dramatically expand our possibilities for wholehearted work, life, and play.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Game of Zen podcast. This is Scott Berman checking in from Philadelphia, PA. And how are you doing today, Paul? What's new out there in Boulder?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good, Scott. It's good to see you. It's been kind of a chaotic stretch of days, I got to admit. The family's, a little fritzy. I think there's a broader communal sense in the collective, if you will, of angst and anxiety and fritziness. So I've been relying on my practice and getting a good night's sleep when I can, to stay grounded. So I'm feeling pretty good right now.
Good.
Yeah. How about you? I know it's been a difficult time for you.
Yeah. We'll get into it in a little bit. But yeah, it's been chaotic summer for me too. And I feel like there's a lot of change and a lot of things happening, and trying to rely, my practice also does help a lot, and reading books and just really relying on the teachings, that it's been very helpful to me to going through difficult times. Yeah. So today we're actually going to talk about teachers, though. Been looking forward to this episode. We're talking today about teachers, what they mean to us, what different forms they've taken in our lives. And, as we've talked about before on this podcast, I'm very grateful to be a student of Paul's for many years now. We met during the early days of COVID, and he's been a teacher of mine, and I value him greatly. And we want to just talk a little bit more about that and your spiritual teaching, Paul, but also about other teachers in our lives.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And for our listeners' benefit, we can say that we didn't really prep at all for this one. Sometimes we do with our preparation, but I've got a lot to share and a lot of experience, and kind of an internalized understanding about working with teachers. So happy to share, my understanding. Hope it's helpful for others.
So let's start with your experience, and let's talk about, I know in past episodes we've talked about your path for Zen and your Buddhist training and things like that, but I'd love to hear when did you become a teacher? How did you become a teacher? What teachers influenced you along the way and made you who you are today?
Yeah, I'll talk about my formal Zen teaching because I think that's what you're asking about. But, I'll preface it to say that we all need teachers. We all need teachers in any kind of developmental process, any sort of growth, any sort of training, whatever word you want to use. We all need teachers. In a spiritual context, every great spiritual, master, teacher, evolved being, whatever you want to call it, they've all had teachers. It's kind of one of the aspects of Buddhism is that the historical Buddha was considered, a very rare being who kind of didn't have a specific, teacher in human form to guide him on his evolution to awakening. He did have some other teachers in some other forms, and we'll talk about the many forms that teachings can come in. But he was in a sense, self-actualized. But it's exceedingly rare in the human plane, to have somebody progress significantly on their own. So we all need teachers. My formal path of formal study, when I started engaging with teachers, I started getting into Zen and Buddhism in my 20s, and I recognized that I needed somebody to guide me. So I explored, I think I might have talked about this in earlier episodes, but I had moved to Los Angeles, a place that's famous for like a place where we could erase our personal histories. And I was kind of running away from my past in a lot of ways, running away from pain and heartbreak quite explicitly. it did point me in the direction of doing spiritual practice. I'd been interested in Zen for a number of years. So back in those days, we're talking 1990, I went to the Yellow Pages. Many of our listeners might not even know what those are, but it was a big book which had a lot of commercial phone numbers and addresses. And I went to religions, subcategory Buddhism, subcategory Zen. And the first listing was the Zen Center of Los Angeles. So, okay, that's what I'm looking for. So I called them up. The web wasn't a thing, and figured that they were they had an introduction. No, actually, I take it back. I just got an address. I got an address, and I jumped in my car on the weekend, and I drove down to downtown Los Angeles where the Zen Center was. Now, I'm going to go into some detail here, but this is how I met my first teacher. Is I pulled up to the Zen Center. I parked in their main driveway where you weren't supposed to park. I walked up to what I thought was the front door, and before my hand could reach the doorknob, the door opened, and out came this tall white person in monk's robes, and he just looked at me and walked by me. And then there was this old Japanese guy who looks at me and nods at me and smiles and walks right by me. And then another few people following him. And then finally another person came out and talked to me and said, "Oh, hi, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Oh, I'm interested in Zen." And he said, "Oh, well, we're in the middle of Sesshin, which is an intensive retreat period. So please come back next weekend and we have an introduction session." I had walked up to Maezumi Roshi's, because that's who he was, the leader and founder of Zen Center of Los Angeles, his back door, the private back door to his private quarters. And he had just given interview to his students in the middle of a retreat.
Wow.
And I walked right up and met eyes with him, and he nodded. So, okay. So there was it was a pretty profound kind of recognition. I was looking for a teacher, and there he was. Right. He met me. I entered into a path of study, at the Zen Center. I became a student. I became a member. And that's how I started my formal study with the teacher, who at that case was Maezumi Roshi. The way that evolved formally over the next few years is I was a student of Maezumi Roshi, and met with him regularly, but not, weekly. Then I moved out of Los Angeles and I came to Colorado, and I actually had a great loss when I lost that, close connection with my teacher. And in fact, then was one of the people who was instrumental in bringing out my teacher, Shishin Roshi, to come out and start a Zen Center in Colorado. And Shishin Roshi is one of the senior successors of Maezumi Roshi. So it was in the same lineage that I had been practicing in. So I helped to bring Shishin out, and I was his formal student for 20 years and worked deeply with him. And then in 2015, I was independently authorized to become a teacher myself. And now I'm a teacher and I have my own students. So those are the highlights and the outline.
That's really cool. I love that story. And I think when you went to the back door and you saw and you made those eye contact and all, I think that meant you were destined to be a great student and eventually your own teacher. There's something, you didn't have to go through the front door. Like, you were different, and that's cool.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say I was different or special, but I would say it was a very special moment, and it was destined. And for everybody's sake, I would say when you're really ready for a teacher and you are open, your antennas are open, you're seeking one, then your teacher will appear.
And how did they know, or when you were ready to get transmitted and become, a formal teacher? Like, was there, a conversation, or was there a testing on students? How did that come about?
Well, there's a constant, testing, for 2 decades. My teacher knew that I wanted to be on a teaching path. Mm-hmm. So he worked with me. I saw my teacher in one-on-one interview 4 times a week for 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how intense and close my relationship with him was. So he guided me through a curriculum that we have in our lineage. of working with certain material, meditatively with meditative mind, with the understanding that I would be sharing that, with students. So I could say probably the final years of my practice were more about, well, it was about, a final deepening of my own understanding, but then it started to be about, well, how I share with others, how I work with others.
That's so cool. And I also know that, you're also evolving still. You're coming up with different ways. I really love the Zen at Work newsletter. Please subscribe if you get a sec. But there's so many good, you go in different directions. I really enjoy like watching you over the last couple of years, introduce new concepts or new ways of looking at it, especially in the work-life balance. And so you talk about how you've changed since you first got transmitted and became a teacher. Like, how has your teaching evolved?
Hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say in a couple of ways. In one way, it's just become more internalized for me. Um, I've met with my students one-on-one in one-on-one sessions, probably thousands of times over the last 10 years. And at the beginning of my teaching journey, I was probably a little bit more questioning, okay, how do I talk with them exactly? What, I was learning how to listen. I was
Right.
learning my intuition around how to guide them, what to say and what not to say, right? Oftentimes it's about as much about that, right? To let them figure something out on their own, or to find an answer of their own when to pose a question. So that's one thing, was just internalizing my teaching to the place where it's very, very, very natural now. At the beginning of the teaching path, it can be effortful. I could come out of a hour and a half session where I've seen 10 or 15 people and be burned out, be really exhausted. And now it's much more, effortless for me. So
Hmm.
that's one strain. The other strain is, I would say, adapting my formal teachings, my Dharma talks, which is in the formal Zen environment, and then my Zen at Work writings and teachings and practices. I've kind of adapting those to, they're coming out of my experience in the world. So I'm adapting them to modern life, which for me includes a really full on business professional career as an entrepreneur and a startup founder and as a business owner and as an executive. So to bring those to bear in those contexts
Hmm.
is something that hasn't been done actually a lot before. There's a few, Zen teachers, Buddhist teachers, who've kind of combined these forms in the way I have, but I've got I would say a very creative adaptation of these teachings to the modern work environment, um, which is something that really excites me these
Yeah.
days.
Me too. And that's why, instantly liked what you were doing too, because get involved. I really like coaching, and we want to expand about other types of teachers. But there's also a lot of work mentors and work coaches out there that are helping executives and helping people in the workforce. And I think that you're excellent at that too, but the combination makes it more powerful. And I've
Mhm.
learned a lot from you for both my business and personal life. And I also just want to talk about like different types of teachers besides the formal training. Like, what other teachers have been helpful in your life? And, kind of talk about the evolution there.
Yeah, well, we actually say in our Zen practice that all dharmas are our teachers, and dharmas in this context means phenomena. So
Mhm.
in that, and I'm going to go like all the way to the end, and then I'll pull it back a little bit to talk about beings. Okay, but really at the base level, everything and everyone can be your teacher. A tree can be your teacher. A cat can be your teacher. A rock can be your teacher. A sunbeam can be your teacher. Right? You can learn something about how life manifests just by, feeling a breeze or watching a cat or staring at a flower, right? There's so much there to connect with energetically. Okay. So, but now let's pull it back a little bit and get more in the way of specific forms, to interact with. There's a story from a famous Zen teacher, Chinese Zen teacher from the golden age of Zen. Joshu is his name. And he practiced formally with his teacher. Nansen was his teacher until he was 60 years old. Until Joshu was 60 years old. Nansen was maybe 80 years old when he died. And Nansen died, and Joshu now, who was like a very evolved being, and he was the leader. He was Nansen's right-hand man in the monastery. So Joshu was basically taking over the monastery. But instead of doing that, he decided to go on a wandering pilgrimage, which he did for the next 20 years until he was 80 years old. And before he left on that pilgrimage, he said, if I meet a 80-year-old person who I can teach, I will teach them. And if I meet a 12-year-old person who I can learn from, I will learn from them as a teacher.
Yeah.
So this perspective of learning from those who are more advanced, you could say, more evolved, they have a perspective that you would like to understand, or an experience that you would like to have, really, really listen to them. And that could be a 12-year-old, it could be a fifth grader, it could be a 30-year-old, but also offer your gifts, and your teachings freely too. They go hand in hand, right? You don't stop being a student and start being a teacher. You're always both.
That's a great point. I really like that, because I do think about learning in my life from so many different people along the way. And I also know that, especially now that I'm a little older, I can definitely teach people something, I try to put good stuff out there for people and things that I've learned, especially from reading. But I also just reflected on the different types of teachers in your life. If you have your parents, and then you have your school teachers, and then you have your college teacher, university teachers, and then you have workplace mentors. And, a lot of people go through that path. And one thing that I'm grateful for is that I've also just worked with a therapist for many years. I was seeing a meditation teacher for a while, and then I met you, which is fantastic. So I'm still, looking for people out there that I can learn from. And as that's grown, my practice has grown. I feel like I've gotten better as an informal teacher to my children or people I work with, who are often younger than me, or even through this podcast. And so I think that's something I want to keep going with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also want to talk about your coaching and how it blends in. So when you go into a coaching environment, let me back up. When you became a teacher and then you started working with entrepreneurs and coaches, it must have been an interesting switch for you, but you were already an entrepreneur at that point, right?
Yeah. So yes and no. And I think the way to answer that is actually to pull back a little bit and say, well, how does a Zen teacher work?
Right.
And then that'll be a context for how my
that's
coaching.
A better way to set for the question.
Yeah. So to talk about that first, a Zen teacher is a person who's helping you to wake up to your true self, wake up to your full potential, wake up to your full present aliveness. Okay, that's what meditation is about. It's to tap into your ever-present true nature, your ever-present aliveness, right? That's what we call, when you have an enlightenment experience, you actually just realize, oh, this is who I am all the time, beyond my labels and history and karma and descriptions and all of that. This is who I am at my core all the time. That's what we say, waking up. So Zen teacher is helping you to wake up. Well, how does a teacher work in that way? They work in three modes. One is as a guide. All right. I'm going to give you instruction on the things that you can do in order to follow this path of waking up. And a Zen teacher is a meditation master. They've done tens of thousands of hours of meditation, as I have. So I can tell you very specifically how to do a meditation practice, how to do intensive retreats, how to bring it into your life, how to do mindfulness practice throughout all your activities, all of those things. I can give you very specific instruction on what works and what doesn't work. All right. So there's that aspect of being a guide. As part of the guide, there's also, some questions about how to live your life, right? Because I've taken vows and I've seen how taking vows work and how they can work. All right. So I can share that with you if you're interested in doing something like that. So it's a guide and instruction, not only into meditation, but into ways of living your life. Okay. I'll do that. The next mode is as a model, right? Just watching or just manifesting, my experience of the Dharma, my experience of waking up, my own life. And then, so I'll shift to, I learned so much from my teachers, Maizumi Roshi, Shinko Roshi, Roshi Shinko, for the last, 20, 25 years, just watching the way they practiced, the way they interacted with other people, the way they made decisions, the way they confronted people when confronting needed to happen, or what they didn't say and what they did say in certain situations, the way they lived their life in a daily basis. I learned so much. And really, in the latter years of my practice as a student with them, I learned more just watching them than I did with any kind of formal study. It was mostly about that. All right. So that's the second mode. And the third mode is actually it's really about the alchemy of presence. It's about being present and just having a consciousness witness your consciousness, okay, and mirror, okay, so you can see who you are from the way that I'm mirroring back in an unprojected way who you are. That's how I meet you, right? So we're constantly, we're getting signals about who we are from the people we interact with. Okay, it's just that's how it works, and that's why we have to actually protect ourselves from false messages that might come in from people who are projecting stuff onto us.
Yeah.
Right? So now in everyday life, we're constantly, our kids are projecting onto us. Our bosses are projecting onto us. Our partners are projecting onto us. Our friends are projecting onto us. Society is projecting onto us. Strangers are projecting onto us, right? Yeah. They are. Now, there might be some, and hopefully there are, people in those groups who see you clearly, right? Yeah. Who truly are mirroring back. It's not all projection. It's maybe partial projection at best, but they actually see you. And that's crucial to have those people really mirroring back to you who you are. A Zen teacher is someone who's actually trained in not projecting, who's, seen themselves deeply enough that they're fully present to you. And so that's one of the gifts and one of the modalities of his teacher, is to be able to mirror back to you and engage with you in a participatory way, not who you think you are, but actually who you truly are. And that's an alchemical process. I call it the alchemy of presence. Just to be in that shifts your own your own actualization, of those energies. And I'm speaking from experience, Scott. I mean, like I said, 4 times a week for 15 to 20 years. And I would go in to a session with my teacher, and nothing might have happened overtly, nothing, but energetically, just for him or her to see me, hear me, maybe 1 or 2 words of acknowledgement, maybe just a shrug, whatever their like living response to me was. I would go out and be, holy cow, wow. I'm like, here I am. It's really remarkable. So that's the third mode.
Brilliant. That was a fantastic answer. The alchemy of presence. I really like that.
Yeah. So I didn't get to the coaching. I don't know if you want me to move on to the coaching now,
Sure.
but I don't know if you have any questions.
Well,
about
I
any
wanted
of
to
that.
add something to what you said. I do think it's interesting, like the projection and on of everybody on you, and seeing it for your own self and learning more about yourself. Really, that's what it's all about too. And then when you see other people, and there's so many different types of teachers out there, and they've all formed you. And I'm a product of all this teaching over time, and I think you're really good at actually recognizing that in other people and bringing it out. You explained something to me when we first started working together, that everybody has Buddha nature. And sometimes the teacher's job is to get it and help you recognize it and pull it out.
Yeah.
And I feel like, that's, and I wanted to also talk about old teachers too. Like, so it's like you have your current day teachers, but you also have teachers like from before you were born, from books.
Mm-hmm.
That's, so it's not just people you can talk to on a Zoom like we're doing today, but what about like people you've read and authors and all the history, especially of Buddhism, but also of business, where you can read and learn, and what kind of teachers have you had there?
Yeah, so I'll take a step up and talk about, we actually recognize three kind of levels of the Buddha treasure, which is kind of the teacher manifestation. There's the historical Buddha himself and all of the sutras and the teachings that are passed down from him. There's a level, the second level is all of the kind of formal teachers throughout history, including, any currently incarnated teacher that you might be working with, right? There's that kind of formal teacher role. And then the most intimate level of teacher is actually your inner teacher. Okay. Your inner Buddha nature, you could call it your inner guru or
Right.
your inner teacher, who kind of intuitively knows. And that's the being that you're helping to wake up and to trust and to listen to, and to do such. So your question is about that second level. It's all of the historical, beings, you could say, who have passed down, teachings in this way. And that's essential to tap into those. Most of us, start with engaging with formal teachings. Well, I shouldn't say most. Maybe some people go right to we go right to an incarnated teacher, maybe not an historical teacher, but most people read something, right? It comes from the Buddha, or it comes from a historical teacher. And there's infinite riches to all of those teachings. There was a period at the beginning where I did a lot of reading from a lot of teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I shifted into practicing with living teachers, I did less of that. And then I started doing more of that under the privilege of the living teachers. And I would go back in and I would have a context, because now I had experience. So I can now, instead of just, where before I started practicing, I would read some Zen books and I would be like, I don't get a bit of this. I don't just, this is completely obscure. But 10 years later, after I'd been practicing for a while, I'd be like, oh, okay, now this resonates. So there's an infinite stream of teachers from the historical past that are, always here for us.
That's so cool. It really is interesting. And I want to get back to like coaching too, because to me, reading about all that stuff is fantastic. Working with you in live is great. Working with my therapist is great, this and that. And it helps me in business. When I get into there's so many complexities to being an entrepreneur and work and investing and all this stuff. And the more that I read, and so both things help me, both the reading and the coaching. And so that's what I always like, the combination of what you bring and how you've helped me so much. So talk more about that and combining those two things.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll start with, kind of what isn't provided from traditional Zen teaching. And that would be kind of real hands-on help with practicing your path of growth and awakening in the specifically in your work world. All right. So, I could get guidance and instruction from my Zen teacher, but I'm not getting that in my work environment. Now, I was fortunate to have my primary teacher, Shishin Roshi, be a fellow who has a PhD in physics. And I studied physics as an undergraduate as well. And then his major professional career for the time that I knew him was as the VP of software development for Merriam-Webster. So he was in technology as a technology exec, which I actually became as well. So he could give me some practical, guidance around that. But the fact is, I didn't really engage with him on that level. I was very much focused on the awakening path. So that's not really a part of, traditional Zen teaching. What a business coach typically does is kind of works with you, I would say, on the first two modes I talked about. There's kind of instruction about, well, how to do this, right? How to run a business, how to start a business, how to make a career decision relative to transition, things like this. That's going to come from their experience, right? And they'll be able to help in that way as a guide. They're also going to help as a role model, how they've lived their life, what's worked, what hasn't worked. You can watch the way they make decisions. They can give you guidance on how to make decisions, those things like that. So what they don't do really is that, typically in a way, although maybe the best ones do, have that alchemy of presence where they're really able to catalyze, I would say probably the best coaches, are able to do this, just kind of catalyze, your higher qualities just by engaging with you, right? So what I'm doing in my coaching is I'm bringing those modalities to bear specifically in the context of work, uncompartmentalized away from, your self-development as an individual and your relational development in your partnership, your family, all of those things. Because, when you look at them, when you look at them isolation, you run the risk of bypassing, right? It's like, is your professional coach going to give you advice on your marriage or give you advice on a spiritual path? Well, mostly no,
Right.
But I do, because I cover all three of those main areas, and I work in the three modalities that we've talked about. And I just, I have the experience to have that work modality just be the front door, if you will, of working there. But always in the background is going to be matters of the spirit, matters of the heart that may come into play, as they always do.
I found that matters of the spirit and matters of the heart are also what make people better as executives, entrepreneurs, or leaders of any kind, because if they are in touch with themselves on that level, then they're more empathetic and they're better, but they also can be tough. But that's the importance of coaching, I think. I've met very few people that run these companies that don't need some sort of coach. And I say that, including myself, it's hard when you're in businesses and you got a lot of different people to manage, and you got money coming in and out, and you have product coming in and out. So, it's something that everybody needs, whether they know it or not.
Everybody does need it. And a big part of it is validation of the person's instincts. It's that, and this actually goes to Zen teaching as well, is that in one-on-one interview, you can come and present your understanding, but until it's really validated by a teacher, it's not fully alive. There's always a question. There's always a question around what are the edges of this? Am I even onto something? Am I deluded? Am I missing it? So it's really crucial to get that validation. The same applies to, professional coaching. And I've seen this, having done this now for, many years, 6-7 years now in this modality. I would say probably 75 to 80% of the time, I am validating the person's instincts around how they want to move forward. Maybe a little less, maybe 65 to 70%. Okay. The rest of the another 15% is going to be, I don't even know where to start with this. So I will introduce the questions to ask, right?
Right.
Because the questions are more important than the answers. When you figure out the right question, now you're more than halfway there, right? So I'll work with them on what the questions to ask are, and then the rest of it could be, okay, I think you're really off base here. What if we really reframed this whole thing and kind of recourse the investigation of this matter? So that might, that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, and I'd like to also just ask you about teachers a couple of teachers in your life that really meant something, that were outside of the Zen path, that were just, maybe it was a school teacher, maybe it was someone at work. Like, who are some other people in your life that became very important to you?
Other teachers, let's see. I've had soccer coaches and soccer players who kind of, I would say I've looked up to in the way they've lived their lives and played the game, with dignity. And you learn a lot about a person from the way they handle conflict in an athletic environment.
Yeah.
And the way they lead a team, for example. So I've learned a lot about leadership in that context. Obviously I've learned a ton from my parents. I'm fortunate they're still alive. I spoke to both of them this morning. They're in their early 80s. And I more and more, just almost every conversation I have with my parents, I'm learning something about how to be a mature elder, confused, messy person in this life, with a lot of wisdom. My mother is like more of a formal teacher. She kind of holds that archetype. So, one thing she said a few years ago that has always stuck with me is, as she started to slow down mentally, she said, "Make confusion your friend."
That's good. I like that.
Like, oh my God, Mom, that is, I love that. That is so helpful.
Yeah.
And I've shared that with others. So yeah, my parents. How about you?
Well, I was thinking of a couple of them. Certainly, with one of my jobs in the NBA, keeping stats, I had a teacher by the name of Harvey Pollack, who was a stat guru who invented a lot of the NBA stats, and he was in the league for about 60 years. And he worked for the Sixers, and he taught me how to keep stats, basically. And I would go up to him at the end of the game and show it to him, and he'd be like, you got 2 points wrong for Dr. J, right? Or Moses Malone. And then I would finally get the points right, and he'd be like, okay, now you got to keep rebounds. And I was like a teenager, and he basically and then I started working with him, and I worked with him for a long time. And I learned how his brain worked around the NBA stats. So he was like a work teacher that I really enjoyed a lot. Also, just my uncle, who I've mentioned on this episode before, he was a Buddhist, lived in New York City many years ago. I spent a lot of time with him. Unfortunately, he died young. And, I really started learning a lot about Buddhism from him. And just really got me into it. And, it's like he sort of opened my mind up to this whole meditation thing a long time ago. And then, we're talking about parents. So I will share some sad news with the audience and you too, is that my mom passed away about 10 days ago. And I was thinking about teaching, and the ultimate teacher sometimes, your mom is just always your teacher about everything up until her last days. And I'm fortunate to have had her for so long, but I was learning from her right until the last few days. We were fortunate that she was awake and alert and talking. And, it's just, so as I think about, my life and teaching, it comes from all forms, and then certain people come into your life and out of your life, and everything changes. But anyway, that's my couple.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Scott. And of course, really feeling for your loss in these days. Yeah. I know with your two daughters, you're an amazing teacher for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like you've internalized, your mom's teachings.
Yeah.
And I know that she lives within you and she lives on within you. And I can see your daughters, kind of holding you and your teachings, as well as your mom's teachings, in their lives.
Absolutely. Thank you. Very well said. And we talked about that, a few times. And it's sort of the broader context of what we're talking about today is that all the teachers that you have over your lifetime help you help other people. And there's no question a lot of me as a parent comes from my mom and dad, and hopefully my kids are learning some stuff from me that they'll pass along. Mm-hmm. And that's the way you do it. But it's also then, you got to, we were fortunate. We had great parents, right? But you also can reach out to people that are your friends and people like Paul and people like your therapist and really continue. I think that's the key, is being open to keeping it going and not stopping. That's the lesson that I'd like to say.
Yeah. The best teachers are really just showing you a path for learning who you are. Right. They're showing that. And sometimes they have a perspective about who you are. They see something in you that you don't see in yourself. So they can point those things out, and they can offer a path for you to, bring that alive.
I got a good quote from Norman Fisher. You do the practice, you realize the way, and yet you must begin by finding a teacher you can have faith in.
Yeah.
So.
It's really important, actually. Yeah, there needs to be that trusting relationship.
Yeah.
So much develops and deepens, from that intimate, trusting relationship. There's a metaphor actually we have for the Zen teaching, is that the student is like the chick inside the egg, and the teacher is the mother hen outside, and the student is pecking at the egg from the inside, and the teacher is pecking from the outside. And the student inside the egg kind of doesn't know what's going on, so it's just pecking. But the teacher has a perspective about what's going on and can actually see the point of the egg and where they're pecking, and they can artfully peck. They're not just going to whack anywhere. It has to be collaborative. Right. Yeah. They're not going to just break the egg down, because that's actually premature. Right. The chicken doesn't do that. They can't break it. It has to be in time with where and when the chick on the inside is pecking. So the teacher knows the spot and the timing and doesn't do too much, but also doesn't do too little, and gives that assistance.
That's awesome. Fantastic. And I believe that's what's happened with you and I over the last couple of years. And I want to tell you, man, you've been a great help to me, and you're a wonderful teacher. And I'm so happy that we get to do this podcast together, because I learn a lot while we're doing it. I listen back to it, and I appreciate all of you listeners for checking us out. Thank you very much. Paul, this is a great episode. Thanks.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you for those words, Scott. And I love being a Zen teacher, being an ongoing Zen student. I'm still learning, but in this formal role. And I really love doing the coaching that I'm doing now too, with my the people who come to me as a professional business life transition coach. So yeah, I welcome people to get in touch with me if this type of mentorship sounds of interest. I just really love doing it, and it's profound, deep, joyful work.
Yes, and check it out at zenatwork.org, and sign up for the newsletter, and definitely get in touch with Paul. And we thank you again for listening today, and we will be back soon with a new episode. Thank you.
Good to see you, Scott. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration into Zen Buddhism and its transformative influence on work and life. We hope you'll subscribe, share, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. May your journey be one of continuous growth and mindful living. From all of us here at Game of Zen, wishing you peace and prosperity on your path ahead.